overwhelm hospitals, but the Indian government has ruled out imposing another full lockdown. Experts warn despite the economic costs of shutting the country down, it might be the only way to break the chain of transmission. Neha Punya, New Delhi.
13 managed isolation workers are being fired for refusing to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. Since Saturday,
we are now going to move to what is really the key part of today's event. And I'd like to introduce Mike Horn, who is one of the partners at Deloitte. And Deloitte has been our partner in the Chamber Breakfast for Budget for 8 of the 11 years we've now been running it. We put huge value on the depth of that connection, and I want to thank Mike and the team for being such great supporters of the Chamber. Thanks again, Mike. Deloitte is an active and enthusiastic supporter of Wellington's business community, always has been, and we're delighted to partner with them on this event. So I'll just please welcome Mike Horn from Deloitte.
Thanks, Simon. Inga iwi, inga mana, inga rau, rangatira ma. Tēnā koutou, katoa. On behalf of Deloitte, I'd like to welcome everyone here this morning to the pre-budget breakfast. I'd particularly like to acknowledge the presence of the Honourable Grant Robertson, Minister of Finance. This will be Minister Robertson's 4th budget, and I think it's fair to say he's certainly had a lot on his plate and a lot to deal with in the last year. However, given all that's happened in the past 14 months or so, New Zealand remains in an enviable position from both a health and economic perspective. The saving we did for a rainy day has really paid off, and the resilience of our economy has been important to the continued well-being of our country. It was just over 12 months ago that we emerged from the level 4 lockdown, and COVID-19 is now part of business as usual. Many New Zealand businesses have returned their focus accordingly to long-term strategies, but they remain well aware that our current stability that we're enjoying could change at any time. And accordingly, they find themselves at somewhat of a crossroads to determining and choosing the path that we take forward. I think the government is also at that same crossroads. They've led us through the depths of the pandemic, and whilst COVID-19 is still present, they now have space to deliver on key commitments and existing investments, all while balancing the cost pressures and ensuring they proceed down the path which sets New Zealand on the right course for the future. New Zealand business is very much looking for clarity and a partnership approach to take advantage of the current window of opportunity that we're enjoying, but also, I think, addressing key structural impediments. And it's with that context that I very much look forward to hearing the address from the Minister of Finance. So please join me in welcoming the Honourable Grant Robertson to the stage.
O tihei Māori ora, he mihi ana nā mana whenua ki te papatonga rewa a ronga whakata te iwi a tēnā koutou. He mihi ana nā mana whenua ki tēnei rohi a Taranaki whānui te upoka o te ika kei te mihi, kei te mihi, kei te mihi. Tēnā koe Mark, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings everybody, it is a great pleasure to be here. I just said before, I'm not sure that this is the key moment of the morning. I think your breakfast was the key moment of the morning, and I hope you all enjoyed it. I want to thank the Chamber for the invitation to speak here today. It is great to be here, and I mean that both sincerely and literally, because for the equivalent speech last year, I actually took part virtually, beaming in from the Beehive Theatrette, with only a socially distanced press gallery bearing witness, and I can tell you that you're already a more lively and friendly crowd than they were. We have certainly come a long way since that event. Although this budget will still be a COVID budget in a number of ways, and I'll return to that shortly, when I delivered the speech last year, we were actually still at level 3. Many businesses were not able to operate or were doing so in the most trying of circumstances. Unemployment was still being forecast to get close to double digits, and there were dire predictions about what would happen to almost every part of the economy. As Mike's just said, as the story has unfolded, New Zealand's economy has proved to be resilient. Now, that's not to diminish the experience of those businesses, particularly in exposed sectors such as tourism, events, international education and hospitality, who have done and continue to do it tough. But overall, as a country, we can point to a number of positives. In terms of unemployment and GDP, New Zealand is strongly positioned relative to the countries that we normally compare ourselves to. The economy was 0.9% below where it was in the December quarter compared to the December quarter pre-COVID. If we look at Australia for the same period, they'd dropped by 1.1%. The United States by 2.4%. The United Kingdom by 7.3%, and Japan by 1.3%. Our unemployment rate has fallen to 4.9%, surprising most economic observers who were expecting even a modest increase in the last data. The latest data is due out this week, and I expect that it will bounce around a bit over the next couple of quarters. But we still compare favourably with the jobless rate across the OECD, which is at 6.7%. Our nearest neighbour, Australia, has an unemployment rate of 5.6%. It is, in fact, a remarkable turnaround that what I hear from a number of employers is their concern at the lack of available staff at the moment, rather than whether they're going to be laying anyone off. One of the things that is sometimes easy to forget is that while our borders have been closed to people, our goods are still getting out to the world, partly through the government's underwriting of air freight services over the last year. Even in the tough times of COVID, consumers all around the world still need what New Zealand sells. Exports remain resilient, with annual sales of logs, fruit and wine rising, while dairy and meat are holding up as well. Global demand for New Zealand's dairy products continues to be high, with Fonterra expecting to pay in a range of $7.30 to $7.90 a kilo of milk solids. This will pump more than $11.5 billion into the New Zealand economy. Firms also appear to be willing to invest more off the back of an improving economic environment, with imports of capital goods strengthening as well. So New Zealand's success has been recognised, not just in how we handled the virus, but also in our economic resilience. Standard & Poor's gave New Zealand the first ratings upgrade of any economy since the pandemic began, and the first for New Zealand since 2003. And in the last couple of weeks, another ratings agency, Moody's, reported on New Zealand's economy, maintaining our AAA rating and noting our very strong institutions and policy effectiveness, along with our robust fiscal position when compared with our peers. But for all of this resilience, we are still at a difficult time in the period of recovery from COVID-19. Even with vaccine rollouts picking up pace around the globe, the devastating impacts of the pandemic are all too real in India and other nations around the world. The ongoing impact of COVID is uncertain, and most forecasts continue to emphasise the likelihood of continued volatility. Supply chain issues are set to affect the economy for much of the rest of this year and into next year as well. For all of these reasons, it is essential that our top priority is that which the Prime Minister outlined at the start of this term, sticking to our plan of keeping New Zealanders safe from COVID-19. That means a continuing focus on keeping our borders secure, while opening up carefully, as we have done with the Trans-Tasman bubble and the Cook Islands. It also means rolling out the COVID-19 vaccine to meet our target that every New Zealander who chooses to be vaccinated over the age of 16 will be by the end of the year. In addition to its importance in keeping New Zealanders safe, the vaccine is an important part of our economic strategy. As our vaccination rates ramp up, we will be less likely to have to revert to further alert level changes. It will also provide additional opportunities to safely open up travel to and from a range of countries. So against the backdrop of COVID, Budget 2021 will take a balanced approach that continues to emphasise investment where it is needed most, alongside careful fiscal management. Our stronger than expected economic performance means we do have more options than we expected to invest in critical services. But we're also mindful that we have an obligation to future generations to prioritise spending and, over time, reduce the debt we incurred in fighting a 1 in 100-year economic shock. There were no costless decisions in our response to COVID-19. And with hindsight, there are many views as to what we could have done differently. But I stand by our approach. We've moved swiftly to save lives and livelihoods. Programs like the wage subsidy scheme saved jobs and businesses, and we set ourselves up to build back better. It was expensive, it wasn't perfect, but it's given us a head start that we are determined to follow through on. One byproduct of the better-than-expected economic outcomes is that not all funding allocated in the COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund has been spent. As part of the budget preparation, I asked each minister to look again at the areas of the COVID spending for which they were responsible to see if it was still needed or still a priority and whether underspends could be reprioritised. This exercise has yielded around $926 million worth of savings. I'm pleased that we've found these savings and that they can be returned to fund our recovery from COVID-19 and to be targeted to where it is needed the most. This will be a recovery budget. I very much see the three budgets that I will deliver this term as a package. It's simply not possible to fulfil every promise or every commitment that we made or address all of the long-term challenges in a single budget. But we do have the opportunity across this term to make real progress on the core priorities of the government as we recover and rebuild. For this term, the government has three goals. In addition to keeping New Zealanders safe from COVID-19, we are focused on accelerating our economic recovery and addressing the big three foundational challenges of our time: housing affordability, climate change, and child well-being. The government is determined that we deliver on these core priorities. To that end, the Prime Minister has asked me to lead the establishment of an implementation unit based in her department. The unit will be funded through Budget 2021 and will monitor and support a small number of critical initiatives, particularly where multiple agencies are involved in the work. This includes areas such as mental health, infrastructure, housing, and climate change mitigation. The unit will report to me as Deputy Prime Minister and will engage closely with Ministers' offices. At a time, in the wake of COVID-19, where the government is playing a much greater role in supporting the economy and investing for the future, it's crucial that we ensure we're getting value for money from every dollar of spending, and that across the public service, initiatives are being delivered in ways that support our economic recovery. As I've already noted, New Zealand's economic recovery has exceeded every forecast. Now is the time to build on the hard work of businesses and workers and accelerate our recovery to move more quickly to our goal of productive, sustainable and inclusive economy. Over the three budgets of this term, there will be a continued focus on the things that we know drive productivity: infrastructure, skills, research and innovation, trade connections and export growth. I do want to particularly highlight the success that we've had in skills and training as part of our COVID response. Since we made apprenticeships and trade training free, targeted trade training free on the 1st of July last year, more than 100,000 people have taken advantage of the program. This includes nearly 58,000 apprentices in areas as diverse as construction and community healthcare. We've seen a significant growth in women and older New Zealanders in these numbers. This is the kind of COVID response that will allow our recovery to continue at pace. We also want to grasp the opportunities of adding value to the industries we have and to take steps into areas where we see our sustainable future. Industry transformation plans in agri-tech, the digital economy and advanced manufacturing are leading the way. We are continuing our work in space technology, hydrogen and other renewable energy technologies as we look towards a more sustainable future. The acceleration of our recovery also needs to look at some of the challenges we face post-COVID. Tourism is a particular example. Now is the opportunity to reset this industry. Pre-COVID, many in the industry and outside were concerned that growth in tourist numbers was not sustainable from an economic or environmental perspective. Minister Stuart Nash is now working with the sector on a new model that will lift the value of what we offer, and we're working to put in place the infrastructure for that industry to thrive when tourists return in large numbers. It'll take time, and the industry will look different when it does happen, but there is a future. Another part of the New Zealand economic story that is in focus as we recover from COVID-19 is immigration. Clearly, inward immigration is well below forecast and will be for some time. We are working with the sectors particularly affected to ensure both that some workers can still come to New Zealand, but also to train and employ those who are already here to fill roles. Beyond the immediate term, the government believes that immigration will continue to play an important part in our economy in the years to come. We will continue to be strengthened economically and socially by people who come here to fill essential skill gaps and make their lives here. But we also know that in some sectors, immigration has seen an entrenchment of low wages and a failure to make technological changes that will improve productivity. Minister Chris Farfoy has work underway to look again at our overall immigration settings and policies. To support that, he and I have asked the Productivity Commission to focus on immigration for its next inquiry, and the terms of reference for that were released yesterday. It's time for the country to have a mature debate about immigration, its positives and its negatives, and I welcome Dr. Nana and his team being involved in this work. The three budgets this term will seek to make significant progress in addressing the foundational challenges in our economy. In March, we announced a significant package of housing initiatives to address both demand and supply issues, including a $3.8 billion package to accelerate infrastructure development for housing. Turning around a housing crisis that has been decades in the making will take time, but we are committed to improving affordability and accessibility of housing. The release of the report of the Independent Climate Commission marks a pivotal moment in our transition to a low-carbon economy. Almost every sector of our economy is affected by the carbon budgets that have been outlined by the Commission. I will have more to say at budget time about our approach to meeting the targets we have set, but we will continue to look for not just the measures we must take to reduce emissions, but the possibilities and opportunities that exist to create high-paying and sustainable jobs as we make the transition. Good progress has been made in the area of child well-being, with more than 40,000 children lifted out of poverty since we came into office using the after housing cost measure. There is, of course, more work to do here, but initiatives such as the Families Package, the Winter Energy Payment, indexing benefits to wage growth, and significantly increasing the amount those on benefits can earn before it begins to abate are making a real difference. Alongside these three important focus areas, the government also has a number of essential pieces of structural reform underway. As recently announced, we are modernising the health system to ensure quality services are provided wherever you live in New Zealand. We're also overhauling our planning system through the replacement of the RMA, and we're reforming the way that we manage water through our Three Waters reform program. Taken on their own, each of these reforms are significant. Together, they represent a government not afraid to make changes for the long-term benefit of New Zealanders. From a fiscal perspective, Budget 2021 will continue our careful and balanced approach. The levels of debt that we've taken on to save New Zealanders' lives and livelihoods are projected to reduce from the middle of the decade. We are in a good position to handle the debt that we have taken on. Interest rates are low, and the half-year economic and fiscal update released in December showed that our debt servicing costs across the 4-year forecast period remain less than 1% of GDP. That's actually below where they were before COVID, despite the significant increase in borrowing. Our fiscal objective, as outlined in the budget policy statement, remains to stabilise debt by the mid-2020s and then reduce it as conditions permit. Even at their elevated levels, our debt position is significantly better than almost every country we compare ourselves to. On an internationally comparable basis used by the IMF, called General Government Net Debt, New Zealand's current levels of debt are slightly below 22% of GDP. That's less than half of Australia's level of close to 49%, and some way away from the United Kingdom at 97% or the United States at 109%. As a small economy, subject to external shocks, it's sensible that we look to reduce our public debt as the economy returns to full health. However, any attempt to hasten this undermines the risks undermines the recovery. A return to austerity measures will simply mean it takes us longer to rebuild society in pursuit of a numerical goal that ignores the real world we're living in. This is all about getting the balance right, which we've shown we can do through COVID and we will keep doing. We will move to reduce debt and return to surplus as a responsible government should, but not at the expense of our people or the hard-won stability and security from our COVID response. In conclusion, I would return to my comments at the beginning of the speech. Budget 2021 will still be a COVID budget. While it won't have the large-scale and urgent response required in 2020, it still needs to recognise that the health and economic impacts of the pandemic are still being felt and will be for some time to come. Like every budget, there are hard choices to be made. We continue to insist that budget initiatives are of a high standard in terms of value for money, and we will be making sure that new spending is directed towards the greatest need. We have an excellent opportunity to secure a recovery in a way that gives every New Zealander a fair go and to deal with the debt that we've incurred along the way while accelerating the growth of a sustainable, more productive economy. I look forward to working with you on that. Thank you very much. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Well, thank you, Minister. I think we have some time for some questions. We've got two roving mics, Emily and Emma. Maddie, who's going to be the first person to ask a break?
I was in this room on Friday night at the 150th anniversary of the Press Gallery. So I'm just noting that. There were no questions. Well, actually, there were lots of questions from politicians to the media, but that's another story.
Kia ora, Minister. Brad Olsen from Infometrics. Last year was all about building back better and thinking about the plan for the future, but there's also an element, I think, we've seen in the economy around getting back on track. What's the balance from your point of view over what we navigate there? Are we going back to normal or are we establishing a new position?
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying at the end of the speech, Brad, I don't think we can pretend, and no economy in the world can pretend that COVID's done and we can just set the clock again and just carry on as we were. That's not a reflection of reality. Because as I mentioned in the speech, be it India, be it Brazil, be it any other country in the world, you can still see the health impacts of COVID. They in turn have flow-on economic impacts. Everybody who's coming off the back of, in large-scale government investment that begins to taper off, that will affect some demand issues in the global economy as well. So all of those things mean that we've got to continue to keep an eye on the New Zealand economy and make sure that the government's playing an appropriate role in that context. The other side of the coin is what we want to bring in and make that recovery one that is built off that phrase of building back better. So it cannot be just a simple return to where we were. It needs to be one that appreciates the change that's occurred. And as I noted in the speech, gives us the opportunity to rethink on a couple of areas. So in the speech I mentioned immigration, because we've had this moment where suddenly we haven't had the immigration that we've relied upon so much, and so now's the time to talk about what settings that has. And then an industry like tourism is a great example of where there is now space and time to be able to support that industry to be the most productive and sustainable version of itself it can be. So I see the balance really being struck there of knowing that this particular budget will still have that very much that COVID lens as we build the recovery. As I said in the speech too, I do see the budgets as part of all three of them together, and you'll hear when I talk about it on the 20th of May, the way in which we're looking at those big issues across the budgets. I think it would be fair to say we've taken on quite a lot when you look at the big structural reforms we're doing, along with trying to address those issues. So it's sensible to not try and claim we can do everything in one budget. But, you would expect me, Brad, to say it, but it'll be a very balanced approach.
Good morning, Minister, and thank you for your speech. Just a quick question, a bit more detailed perhaps. You mentioned this morning and you announced yesterday the Productivity Commission will be looking into immigration, and you've just mentioned it again to Brad. Could you perhaps tell us in a bit more detail, and especially for the businesses here, that are currently struggling with accessing skilled labour. What reassurance can you give them, and what will it mean in more detail, what you've assigned the Productivity Commission to do regarding immigration?
Yeah, thanks for the question. The most important part of that answer is that we're not waiting for the Productivity Commission to produce a report to do things. So Chris Farfoy is actively working on policies and settings now, and they will be rolled out over the course of the next year. The great advantage of having an entity like the Productivity Commission in our system is that they can take that longer term view. And really what we're asking them to do is talk about what is the place of immigration in our economy in enhancing productivity, and what changes or to the settings or the approaches should we make. As I said in my comments, immigration has been a critical part of the New Zealand economy, and it will continue to be so. As a small country, our standard of living is disproportionate to who we are, the size, the profile of the economy, in part because we have recruited in people who have lifted the value of what we do. We will keep doing that because it's an important part of the approach. What we don't want, however, is to see immigration play out in such a way that it depresses wages, or it does leads companies to not look towards productivity improving measures that they could take, for example, in the uptake of technology. And so getting that balance right within the system is what we're asking the Productivity Commission to have a look at. In the short term, Minister Farfoy is seeking to find ways of opening up to get more skilled people in, and you would have seen announcements over recent months where we've progressively done that, be it RSE workers within our horticulture industry or expert workers within businesses right across New Zealand. As time wears on, as we see the vaccination programs roll up, we'll be able to expand that more. But what we want to do is also at the same time have that conversation, which unfortunately sometimes gets hijacked. I think there is the time and the space in New Zealand society to now have a mature debate about it, and I think the team at the Productivity Commission are well placed to lead that. Perfect budget.
Have we got any other questions?
Someone down the back.
Hi, thanks Minister. Nicole Steinway from the Australian High Commission. I noticed you didn't mention anything about the wellbeing approach, and I just wanted to ask if you could comment a little bit about how the Living Standards Framework had played into the development of this budget and where those indicators were at.
Yeah, and you'll see that it will still be called a wellbeing budget, and we've used the same set of processes that we began when we did Budget 2019 in developing this budget up. So it's the wellbeing objectives that we outlined in the budget policy statement that we put out earlier in the year are the ones that guide us. They are enduring objectives because they are taking on the overall wellbeing of New Zealand society across generations. So that's issues like mental and physical health, child wellbeing, improving opportunities for Māori and Pacifica, the transition to the low carbon economy, future of work. So those wellbeing objectives are enduring, and they have influenced the way in which the budget has been put together. We'll also be talking a little bit in the budget about the evolution of the Living Standards Framework concept. We used a framework this year called Heara Waiora, which has been developed to try and take those concepts of wellbeing which have been sort of internationally developed and give them more of a New Zealand flavour. And so you'll see some evidence of that in the budget this year. And then I guess my overall comment would be the one I made towards the end of the speech, which is that what the wellbeing approach has shown us is that through COVID, that the very best economic response was a strong public health response. And that the things that we value in New Zealand society include making sure that we're a prosperous country and that we do well economically, but they also include looking after each other and making sure that we've developed, a culture and a society where everyone has a place and a role. And so that overall wellbeing approach we took to COVID carries on through Budget 2021 as well. It's the reason why, if you were taking a very pure economic approach, you might say that we could start returning to levels of debt that we saw pre-COVID more quickly than what we are going to be doing in this budget. But we're not doing that because that would undermine the well-being of a range of New Zealanders. So you'll see all of that threaded through the budget and an evolution actually of that. Since you asked, and because there weren't too many other questions, I'll add one more bit to it, which is more in the realm of the Public Finance Act. So those of you who now didn't get enough sleep last night can just nod off for a second. We're continuing our reforms of the Public Finance Act, and one of those that will be rolled out during Budget 2022, would have been 2021, but COVID got in the way, is that we are going to be developing more of a cluster approach to the way that we develop proposals for the budget and the way that we roll them out. And we've got two clusters that we're piloting for Budget 2022. One is in the natural resources and primary industry area, and the other is in the justice area. And that will bring all those agencies and ministers together to create one set of objectives and proposals. And we'll pilot that out for Budget 2022 with the idea that we will actually create a smaller number of clusters. We've got about 47 votes, 47 appropriations at the moment, and I think the world would be a better place if we could reduce that down. People don't use government services via vote appropriations, they use them across the board. You don't wake up in the morning and say, today I will use the health, education and social development votes. You wake up and think, what are the things I need the government to help me with today? We want to move that Public Finance Act approach, which has served us well in terms of its transparency and accountability, but add to that the ability to break silos down. And that's a big part of the wellbeing approach, is actually looking at the whole of what government does to support somebody. So I'm quite excited about those changes. I'm probably about the only person in New Zealand excited about the Public Finance Act, but I genuinely am, and I think those changes will make a big difference to wellbeing.
Look, I'll close off the questions at this point. Minister, I suspect there'll be many more questions on May 20th than today, so we've appreciated the prelude to the budget and spending some time with us. I very much value the time that you've given us, and I know that this is in an endlessly busy time. This is an especially busy time, so I want to thank you very much again for joining us. We have a little bottle here of Aotearangi for you to enjoy perhaps after the 20th. The corks are pop. So congratulations. Thank you very much.
Cheers, sir.
Look, just a couple of other things before we wrap up. One of them is that I want to acknowledge the work today of my team, and particularly Charlotte Collins, who's standing over there and never likes to be acknowledged, but she's done a fantastic job putting together today under quite a lot of pressure. So Charlotte, thank you from me for that wonderful breakfast. And the final thing before we close off the event with our closing karakia is a business card prize draw, a trip to the Gold Coast. The team from Jetstar were actually delighted that I chose by accident a Jetstar coloured tie today. And they also caught me trying to throw all your business cards out later on because this is a fantastic prize and I would love to win it myself, but ethically I don't think I can enter. Jetstar have long been supporters of Wellington and the Chamber. We're delighted to have them and Marriott sponsor our pre-budget breakfast. And in fact, they are going to launch the only Wellington Gold Coast direct flight from 1 August, all going well, which is exciting. To celebrate the bubble opening, the lucky winner of this prize draw will enjoy return tickets for two with Jetstar from Wellington to the Gold Coast, 4 nights accommodation in a mountain view room, and breakfast at the JW Marriott Gold Coast. I'm going to ask James Stafford, the manager for New Zealand sales for Jetstar, our value partner, to come up and draw the winner for us. James. This is a big moment.
That's bright. Kia ora. Honourable Grant Robertson. Ladies and gentlemen, Jetstar New Zealand is